Yeah, we're live. 6:55. It's even before 7 o'clock. How are you guys all doing? Let's see who's in there. Karen, JB, Godzy Garage. Let's see. Snafu, JB, Land. Let's see what's going on. Norway, nice. I like it. I'm here, Richard. Go ahead and start. It's official. Engine time. What's up? So I just got back and went out with my lovely wife, Lisa. It was awesome. Tonight we're going to talk about the video that I'm working on right now. Is I have a video that I'm doing. I'm just finishing the editing on. It's 3 different stroker motors. So it's a 408, a 468, and a 495. I've put these up in various other configurations before, but apparently guys wanted to see the different strokers all together. So you can see what it took to make kind of normal stuff like the 408 is, pretty much your run of the mill kind of thing. A 4-inch stroke in either a 6-liter iron block or even the aluminum 6.2 blocks is pretty common. But on the other ones, we went bigger than that. Guys loved when I posted the video up on the 454 that Brian Tooley did with the LS7 block, putting the 4250 stroke in that. So the 468 was a lot like that. But what I did was, rather than use an LS7 block, I used an aluminum factory block, and then we sleeved it. And then we could put a big stroke in it. And I put even more bore in it than Brian did. So that worked out really good. And then the 495 is actually an RHS tall deck block that we put a 4,500 stroke in. So for all you mathematicians out there, go ahead and do the calculations, because we ran this thing to 7,000 RPM. So we ran almost a 500-inch motor with a 4,500 stroke to 7,000 RPM. So all you guys out there that can talk to me about piston speed and tell me that, oh, that's way too much piston speed to run a 4.8 or a 5.3 or a 6.0 at the RPM that we're running it at, do the calculations on the piston speed for 7,000 RPM and a 4.5-inch stroke, and then tell me tell me what the piston speed is and why it's too long and why it'll never last and why it doesn't work and why it doesn't make any power. And then we can talk about rod ratio, and we can all argue about all the things that we always argue about. That's kind of the same. Good stuff though. So, but the question, and this will actually be the poll for tonight. We'll get into this a little bit later. Is even with all of these, the potential of all of these stroker motors, because one of them made over 800 horsepower, but even with the potential of an all motor buildup, should people be doing that? Like, should you still do an all motor buildup as opposed to just putting even a little bit of boost in your average junkyard buildup and just running it that way? Because cam springs and boost obviously can make you a lot of power. So does it make sense? I'm going to go ahead and try to lighten this up a little bit. See what we did here. Let's see if we can lighten that up a little bit. There we go. Does it make sense to put, and this will be the poll, but we'll do this later on when more people are here. Does it make sense to do an all motor buildup like that? Or are there still a lot of all motor guys? Or should you just do like boost because it's so easy and efficient? Oh, but that's a good point, JB. But Richard, don't we have to de-stroke it for that? Yes, you have to change the stroke. You have to put less stroke in it so that you get better like rod to stroke ratio and better piston speed. The only other downside for that is you have all those good things, but the downside is that it does make less power. So it depends on what you're looking for. Let me know if you do sick week. I actually want to do some of those things next week. So I actually have some information. Today's Thursday. So my buddy Jimmy Hiddle was at the dyno today with his J series powered NSX, and it did really well. We're talking about almost 600 horsepower at the tire with your junkyard kind of average J32 and boost and nothing special. This was an old turbo that I've had laying around for years. It's the Precision. I think it's a 67 or 69 millimeter. I need to get the specs on that. But it's the one that I've run it. I ran it on the K24. I ran it on the 2.5 liter Suzuki Kazashi motor that we ran it on. I've run it on LS motors. I've run it on a ton of stuff, and it's worked pretty well. And it'll be interesting to see. Like I said, he's basically out of fuel pump. So Holly, guys, if you're listening, we need to talk to you about getting a different fuel pump in this NSX because it's out of fuel basically, and it needs more fuel pump. So as soon as we get more fuel pump to it, we'll be able to make a lot more power because it's only running like, I don't know, it's like 13, 14 pounds or so. And it's making a lot of power already, even just on these. This is the first time it's been on the dyno. He's just been driving around basically and doing the tuning on it with an AEM. So it's really impressive. And the cool thing is it seems to be making every bit the amount of power that the C30 NSX motor did. And this is just a junkyard like J32. So it's all working out very well so far. So it'll be interesting. And then he is going to be taking it to the track. So we've got some drag radials for it. He's doing a slipper valve. We're doing, we need to do a fuel pump. So I'll get a fuel pump for him. And then once we do that, he has the ability to make a lot of power because even an NSX making 600 at the tire is going to be really fast. And then one that's making 700 or 800, or depending on how far we can go, I have other turbos that he can use on that J series motor. But it will be really, really cool to figure out what's going on. And then I want him to run like at different power levels. I'd like him to run the NSX at 500 or, like 400 at the tire, 500, 600, 700, whatever the different numbers that we can run, and see so that we can correlate mile an hour with power. And then, we know what the math tells us, but I'd like to see that in real life, in real time. So here's what happens on the chassis dyno, and then here's what actually happens out on the track. So it'd be really, really cool stuff. So Jimmy's doing great stuff with that NSX, and it's all working out really good. And he's put a ton of effort into that. So let's see. Jesse, can you explain heads like the same heads will have different CCs like 210 or 225 or 245? Flo, why would you put a 245 cc head over a 225? It depends on the build or the NA, or doesn't matter. The size of the port is going to be more a function of the RPM that you want to run, and also even more so, I think, the displacement of the motor. So what guys typically do is small displacement heads, like you're talking about a 210 or 205 or 185 for small block Chevys and things like that, tend to be for more milder applications. And then the bigger heads, 210, 220, 230, 240, 250, 260, whatever. Again, depending on, and the other thing to think about, and we'll go off on a little tangent here, is the size of the head that you're talking about, 225, 245 cc. You also need to take into account what kind of head is it, because a 220 head for a small block Chevy head is going to be a different actual port volume than it is for an LS or a big block or anything else. So the length of the head has a big effect on what that total port volume is. It's not just that, that's not a universal thing, but bigger ones tend to go with bigger displacement motors, which is why guys for LSs put rec port heads on, which tend to be more CCs. They tend to work better on larger displacement motors. 408 with an LS3 head is a good setup. Yes, it is. So is a 6-liter. If you're talking about stock heads, there's nothing that makes more power than a factory rec port head. At least none of the factory things do. Everybody hit the like button. Would the factory LS ECM have any issues with increased displacement? If so, how much displacement would the factory ECM be good with? Well, if you can go in and retune it, you can. I've seen guys run lots more displacement with it, even boost and all kinds of stuff with a factory ECU. We can see the sun shining off your head. Nice. Building twin turbo V6 as we speak. Okay, cool. What kind of V6 is it? Money can build NA in any level. That's true. You can make lots of power, but if you have a 4.8 liter, even if you made, a really high specific output where it was like millions of dollars to build it, even if you made 2.1, 2.2, even let's say 2.4 or 2.5 horsepower per cubic inch, boost is going to do twice that. So that's the thing. And you could do it a lot less expensive. So that's the thing. Is it going to be beneficial to do that? If you really wanted a reliable engine, then go NA because the turbos wear out. I don't think I would agree with that. Speaking of Novas, the Nova is out in the backyard. My opinion is it depends on the platform. Some blocks just aren't that strong. I would agree with that. I think that a lot of blocks were designed for NA power levels by the factory, whatever factory that is, and that they weren't designed to triple or quadruple the factory NA power output. So there are limitations built into the designs of some of these blocks. Brandon, any big NA 462 valve videos? I don't know if and I'm just going to throw shade on the 462 valve guys. I don't know if a big NA 462 valve power actually goes together, but it can. Or nitrous, love the small V8s. Again, you're just looking at a specific power output level based on that displacement. The problem with the 2 valve is it doesn't have a lot of really good cylinder head choices. You have ported stock ones, or you have the trick flow heads, which work very well. But even those are somewhat limiting in terms of what you can do in total power output. Boost doesn't seem consistent. It's less reliable. It's overdone. I think about it all the time. Okay, so you're not a boost guy. What brand wastegate do you run? Looking for something cheaper than tile that won't fail and blow my engine. Well, that's the problem. I honestly think in terms of wastegates that there's a direct correlation between price and quality. So somebody wants what they want, what the market wants, what Boosted Problems wants, is they want the secret wastegate that has all of the quality of a Turbo Smart or Tile or let's say other kind of high-end wastegate, but has a price of the lowest price deal. I honestly don't think that exists. I think that those things go hand in hand, particularly on the wastegates. On other things, I don't think that that's the case. But on wastegates is one of the areas where I would spend money on. We use Turbo Smart stuff. I've used Tile stuff in the past, and it's worked good. I have used successfully some of the CX Racing stuff, but I've also found some of the offshore stuff to not be anywhere near consistent in the spring and the provided boost pressure that they've rated the wastegate at. So you need to know that going in is potentially problematic. So a turbo doesn't wear out faster than the rest of the engine if it's a good bottom end. Here's the thing: if you have factory turbo applications and the turbo lasts hundreds of thousands of miles before it wears out, especially if obviously in a turbo application, I would argue that you need to be a little bit more conscientious about oil changes and things like that. But I think if you have factory turbos that last hundreds of thousands of miles, they've proved that they do in fact go that long. Now, I don't know if a $163 or $200, $250, whatever the number is, offshore GT45 is going to have that kind of like OEM factory longevity. I'm not going to say that it does because I don't know, but still, but you can also say that the average guy that puts an LS, a junkyard LS that already has 200,000 or 300,000 miles in their car, they're probably not honestly looking for another 200 or 300,000 miles to run that thing. They're going to get rid of that long before that would ever happen. And I don't know that that would ever happen anyway. I don't know that there's 600,000 miles worth of trouble-free operation in any kind of these motors, unless you don't, unless you're, especially on a boosted one. If you're just driving it around and you start it every day and run it and keep it maintained and keep the oil change and all that stuff, engines can last a really, really long time. But if you're out doing donuts and doing coffee and getting donuts and doing donuts and drag racing and stuff, I don't think you're going to expect the engine to last nearly as long as it does on an OEM application. Richard, have you ever had a lifter tray fail? I use OEM ones, and I haven't had a lifter tray fail. I wouldn't put it like that. What I would say is I've had factory LS lifter trays wear out because, the cycle life of anything is not infinite. So as the lifter goes up and down, it wears that, and it gets it gets a wear pattern in it, and it makes it bigger because it's wearing away some of the material. And then what happens is it no longer wants to hold the lifter in place and centered and straight on the camshaft. And if it allows that lifter to rotate, bad things are going to happen. I've had some go away like that. So a new lifter tray especially if you're putting a camshaft in or those kinds of things, a new lifter tray is pretty cheap. it's pretty cheap insurance, and I definitely would do that. If for no other reason, like I like them for the motors that we put on the engine dyno, because I do a lot of cam testing. So I do a lot of cam swaps. So I like to have a new lifter tray in there, if for no other reason than when I rotate the thing around, all the lifters go up and are head of the tray, so I can easily do cam swaps. So it makes sense just to do it for that. I have an LS1 with a 98 Corvette. I'm looking at a heads already, bought a 383. So from a stock standpoint with a 5.7, you can put a 243 head on it, like a factory 243 head. You can mill it, you can port it. There's lots of good factory ported 799s or 243s, or you could go with any number of aftermarket heads, 205 or 215 or 225, trick flow heads, airflow research, Dart. I mean, lots of people have heads available for that. Troy, I thought about boosting my 351 Cleveland, but found the blocks just aren't that great for over 600 horsepower due to the thin walls without block fill, and stock heads can almost make that if it's built right. Okay. I don't think you have to worry about block fill with a turbo on a 351 Cleveland. All dressed up. I'm actually just coming back from, we went to happy hour, so it was kind of nice. I'm building an LS Turbo Nova. Nice. Guys will say the Clevelands have weak bottom ends. I don't know who those guys are. When I worked on city transit buses, the Washington Metro, the turbos didn't fail a lot, 300,000+ miles. The factory stuff is designed to run a long time. When they get contracts from suppliers to supply those turbos or whatever they're supplying to the OEM stuff, they don't want to have warranty claims. So they want these things to last a long time. I'm building an LS 72 Chevelle. Nice. I would like to have a Chevelle like that. Scott, I saw an MR2 in Raleigh with a 3-liter 6 in it. Nice. That would be a good combination. I need some help doing my cam. Karen, what kind of help do you need? You're obviously in the right group here. I need race car friends to do race car stuff with. That's why we're here, man. Volume to length ratio would be a good ratio to calculate to get an average number for port area. Okay. Dave, love your channel. Building a 406 twin turbo LS3. Keep up the good videos. That should be a good, that you should have not had any problem at all making lots of power with that. I personally do a VS Racing billet 7875. That's a good 1,000 horsepower or so turbo. Russell, road racing, aluminum block turbo LS, any cubic inch is what I would be interested in talking about. Intercooling strategies, avoiding hot fuel, big pump, 30+ minutes in boost, avoiding burn pistons, heat soak. So the cure for that is going to be intercooling, which the nice thing about road racing is you have constant vehicle speed, which is good for air-to-air intercooling. Tune is going to be critical. Managing, and that it's that way with any kind of road race car. Managing heat is going to be important. The cubic inches is going to be irrelevant because that's kind of be the same, I think. So if you had a 5.3 with an aluminum block 5.3, I think that would make all the power that you need. And the nice thing about a turbo motor is you don't have to run a lot of RPM for even for road racing. Scott, MR2 made 280 the tire, according to the owner. An MR2 with 280 horsepower would be nice. Hope the Honda gangs arrive. I do like Hondas. Is it true that stroker motors don't like boost? No, that's not true at all. Every motor loves boost. What's the simplest least sensor EFI system you've used? Well, the EFI, most EFI systems will take a signal from lots of different sources. So like the Holly that we'll use, we can run that with just a distributor. So with no other sensors other than the distributor. We don't run air temperature. We don't run water temperature. We zero out all of that stuff. So we can either take a crank sensor or just a crank sensor. As long as we have that, that's all that we need. So you need essentially one sensor. It's nicer if you have a TPS, but again, we've run it plenty of times without that. Richard, longtime listener, first time caller. I just love that, like I'm Howard Stern or something. When will you do a stock 6.2 LS motor comparison, ported heads versus aftermarket heads? You should take a look at the LS3 intake test. There's lots of 6.2 stuff. I've run stocks LS2s, and I've done ported heads on an otherwise stock LS2, and it's about 10 horsepower. It's a total waste of time. You have enough head flow in a 6.2 with a rec port head. We've made nearly 700 horsepower with a stock head, 680 or 690 horsepower on a really big motor. So you have way more. You have 315 CFM worth of cylinder head. So in a 6.2 like an LS3 or an L92, the last thing you should be thinking about modifying is the cylinder head. You should be thinking camshaft and valve spring on a 6.2. That's what's going to make power. And also the factory intake, also very good. So just think camshaft on that. It'd be nice to see you do a walk around the Nova to see where you're at and later some update along the way. Richard, if two heads are identical with the exception of chamber size, would one make more power because of the chamber size? Not from compression increase. Well, if the chamber size is different, then the compression is going to change. So it has to be from compression. You can also have a change in power from chamber design. And that would be the case like of a 317 head versus like a 799 or something else. And that's why milling a 317 head doesn't get you what a 799 or a 243 head does. So the chamber shape is also responsible for power, not just the chamber volume. But the chamber volume obviously is going to change static compression. Max power for a daily driven LS2. I don't know what those two combinations you're talking about are. I don't know what your definition of daily driven LS2 is. You can run a turbo on a otherwise stock one that makes a lot of power. You can put a really big camshaft in it, and some guys like that and want to drive it around. Other guys think that's way too much camshaft and it doesn't idle well enough for me, and it doesn't have the drivability that I want. So all of that is subjective. My above comment was reference to boost versus stroker in road racing. I use an eBay housing with a real tile diaphragm. So that might be a good combination. I didn't know that the diaphragm was interchangeable with some of the low-cost deals. I know the eBay GT45s hold up really well. What would you recommend for an inexpensive wastegate? I would recommend that you don't put an inexpensive wastegate on there. I love boost, but I'm going to go NA and get where I want, then boost. That's a good combination. If you make lots of power NA and then you add boost to it, you're going to have an even better combination. Ever use cheap Chinese DNA performance 200cc heads on a small block Chevy? I didn't know that DNA offered cylinder heads. I've never seen those. I mean, obviously there's a lot of others available and they probably source them from all the same place, but I haven't ever tried those. Making power NA is like hitting from the men's tee. Oh, it's funny how people are silly. And you're gone. I love deleting people. I love having that power. My Focus ST went 8,000 miles before the first turbo failure. That's got to be on you, I would think. 200,000 miles in 21 years on my HX35 and my Cummings. That seems more normal to me. Richard, love all your stuff. I'm about to order an LS3 530 from Blueprint for a C5 street track car. How big of a cam can I throw it that's with a stock pistons and heads without piston to valve clearance? I don't know. I don't know about that particular motor. If it's already making 530, it already has some kind of cam in it, obviously. If it's a factory style, and you're going to have to measure this, but if it's a factory style head with factory valve drop and it has a flat top piston in it, which it probably does, even if it has a dish piston, the edge of the piston is still going to hit the valve anyways. It's going to be like a 231-ish kind of cam, 231, 248 kind of thing. Do stroker motors don't like boosts? I don't. That's not really a question. It's kind of an offhanded statement. The displacement of the motor is irrelevant to boost. Stroker motors are going to, if you compare for instance, a 351 to a 408 Ford Windsor stroker, the 408 is going to have more boost response. The boost response is going to be much better, which could be important if you have a big turbo. If you have a turbo that the 351 already responds well because it's fairly small relative to the power output, going to a 408 is not going to get you much other than give you more back pressure. But if you have like a 1,000 horsepower turbo and you want to spool up, a 408 with the same kind of heads, cam, and intake that you had in Aero 351 is going to be a better combination. The stroker deal and boost it's exactly what I just described to you. ACER, what about lift? The lift is irrelevant to piston to valve clearance almost. It's all about duration. A 351 Windsor likes to split. I have never heard a 351 Windsor block, so I don't know if that's the case. Oh, we need to do today's poll. So today's poll will be let's see. So let's see. I hate that this is a yes or no kind of thing, but okay, here we go. Okay, here's the poll for today. With all of the boost options available for any kind of engine buildup, is an NA stroker buildup still a viable option? So do you think an NA motor is still a player, given the fact that all we have to do is add boost to almost any kind of junkyard motor? Should you actually build a stroker version? Like, should you build a 383.53 or a 406 or a 416? With all the boost options available, I'm going to put the word available here. With all the boost options available, is an NA stroker buildup still a viable option? Ask your community. Ask and you shall receive. Yeah, 302s would be more likely to split than a 351 Windsor. Scott T, there were multiple raspberries involved. Boost yesterday, boost today, boost tomorrow. It's just all boost all the time. Big blocks also like boost. Budget building a 351M, which is a better route, not 195 trick flow, CNC port, 64 cc chamber heads, or Speedmaster 220 as cast. I've never compared those two directly, but I think that I think that a 351M with 195 heads, given the flow rate of a 195 head, it'll probably support whatever you're doing. Richard, have you tested the Summit 8728 R1? Don't know if those 600, 585. That's a weird lift split. 212, 218, 110 plus 3. I'm adding it to a stroker. I don't think I've run that cam yet. Let's see what else guys got going on. Make sure I don't get too far behind. But as cost-effective means for maximum big bang for buck horsepower, boost beats strokers for sure. What are you testing? What fuel are you using? Too much torque means too much wheel spin. And also an NA motor is more reactive. Nice. It all depends on how much power horsepower you're looking for. I think the Stroker LS is cool because it's relatively small and lightweight. I have to say, I do like that. Like, I always like, even with small blocks and stuff, I liked a fact that a guy could make a, with a small block, you can realistically make a 440 or 50 cubic inch small block. And if you put 283 power pack valve covers on it, so you can disguise it as a 280. Nobody's going to believe that, but still, it would be kind of cool. 351 Windsor or 408 Windsor with 220 heads. Both of those will work just fine. The 408 is going to make more power. The bigger motor is definitely going to make more power than a smaller one. I checked my piston to valve clearance, came out with 25 thousandths. How safe is this? What you're showing there, 0.25 is 250 thousandths. That would be a lot. Is it 0.025, like 25 thousandths? That would make more sense. That's a little on the tight side. I've run them there, but I would probably want more. Because the other thing about piston to valve clearance is when you're checking it in the static condition, you have to realize that under a dynamic condition, the piston to valve is actually going to increase. There's going to be way more deflection, more than most of us want. If the dynamics of a spintron are to be believed, which I think that they should be, I think you see a lot more deflection than we would want. Should I trade my LQ4 with Terminator X for a 496 big block? Richard, make the choice for me. The big block has forged internals. Well, how much do each of them make? Pick the one that makes the most power. 408 Windsor with CHI 205 heads. I did run one of those back in the day. It made good power. Ain't no punks in the house. What's going on, man? How do you recommend to build an LS with near 700 horsepower challenge the most reliable way? 700 horsepower, the easiest way to get 700 horsepower is to add boost. There's no better way to do that. If you want to do that NA, it becomes a lot more difficult. Any experience with the Edelbrock ProFlow 4 EFI and a 383? If you're talking about a small block Chevy, I don't remember running the ProFlow 4 EFI on a small block Chevy. I did run the ProFlow on an LS, and it does almost exactly what a high ram does, which is not unusual and I think kind of expected, given the fact that they're both tunnel ram styles with a front mounted throttle body and stuff. I think ultimately the high ram would make more power only because it has a bigger throttle opening. I think that the ProFlow, the one that I tested anyway, I think had a 90 millimeter opening, and the high ram has available with a 105. The better idea, stroker and boost. Yes, definitely. Imagine boosting BTR's LS7. Vans heads cam intake 5.7 LS1 versus the same heads cam intake 383. Will the 383 make more power and torque? Is it just more, or is it just more torque across the board? Well, more torque across the board means that it's making more horsepower and torque. Because if it makes more torque all the way through the RPM range, you're going to get a big change in horsepower because those are all mathematically related. A 3 compared to a 346 is going to make usually more power, unless those heads or camshaft or intake that you're putting on it are like ultra restrictive, which on the LS, they're not. Even in stock form, they're not. So a 383 is going to make more power everywhere than a 5.7. Yes, it was. If you have 250 thousandths piston to valve clearance, you have more than enough. Which LS do you recommend and what kind of boost? If you're going to make 700 horsepower, if you go to the wrecking yard, get a 5.3, put springs in it, put a cam in it, almost any kind of camshaft, any kind of stage 1 or stage 2 truck cam or NA cam or whatever you want to put in, all of them work. A truck Norris cam will work. Put that in a 5.3 and add boost to it. And with not very much boost, you're going to be easily at 700 horsepower. 250 thousandths piston to valve clearance would be a lot. I don't even know if you have that much if you have a stock camshaft. Have you ever tested different LS coils against each other? I have not. We normally run the Big Bang. Like when we run the Big Bang motors, we run them with LS3 coils. I've run truck coils, but I've never compared them at a level where we get into like misfire. And the other thing that's really beneficial for us is we can adjust the dwell time on the Holly. So if we put the dwell time at like 4 or 4.5 milliseconds, all the coils perform pretty well. But since we've done 1,500 plus horsepower and 1,300 foot-pounds with like 18 or 19 thousandths ring gap, the coils don't seem to make a big difference. How do you compete with an LS with a 351 Windsor? There's lots of good heads in that stuff for a 351 Windsor, but honestly, it's an older design, so I wouldn't expect it to make as much as a comparable displacement LS motor. The affordable stroker crank for the LS is the one for the L8T truck engine, $670 from a GM dealer. Will that LT crankshaft go in an LS, or is that only for an LT, or are they the same? The Liberty LS3 cranks are pretty cheap, 4125. I wouldn't ever put a 4125 stroke crank in anything that didn't have a longer sleeve. Like if you were putting it in an LS7 block, then that might be okay, but not in any of the factory sleeve lengths because it's going to pull the piston too far out of the bottom of the cylinder. We don't normally go more than a 4-inch stroke on any of the factory sleeve lengths. Matt, thoughts on a 427 cubic inch small block Chevy? That's a lot with an AFR 220 Super Victor 11.5 to 1, 700 260 cam. Is it going to make 700 horsepower? I'd be surprised if it made that much. with that cam and those heads, but you let me know if you run it on the dyno. I would think that that'd be closer to 600 than 700. Would a set of 406 heads do well with a stroker like a 408 with a truck Norris cam for a good daily driver and a body Chevy? I don't know what a 406 head is. Stroke, you had a possibly done it wrong. I had a number one at TDC with a dial indicator on the valve, a checker springs, and depress the valve until it contacted the piston. What you need to do is make sure that you're on the base circle of the cam, and that you're not opening or on the opening or closing ramp of the camshaft. Spin the motor around until you see put your finger on the push rod, spin the motor around until you feel the push rod go down. When it goes down and it's down there for half a rotation, that's fine. You can measure it right there. Well, no, you can't, because you're going to have to be at the right point. You have to be 10 degrees before or after TDC. What I like to do is I hook everything up with a checker spring, and then I cycle it through. And then, like I said, the critical points are going to be 10 degrees before and after. And what I do is I just depress the spring at all of the different angles, because I want to find out what's going on. Like you'll figure out where the tight point is. There'll be spots where there's like, you have 600,000 piston valve clearance because the piston isn't in the way. And but you'll get to a point where you'll get to the close point. If you keep pushing it down, you get to the point where, there's not very much room. There's not very much room in there. You get to a point where, okay, this is the tightest point where it's going to be. I like doing that because I like finding out where that is. You can calculate that, and like Brule kind of knows where to start and adjust it. I like doing the whole thing. I like sweeping it through both the front side and the back side, but figure out where the tight point is, and then figure out how much that is. And that's where, when you find out where that tight point is, just by pushing it down with your finger, then you can hook up the dial indicator. And after you've done it 100 times, like we have, you push it down and you go, oh, that's 50 thousandths. Oh, that's 150. You'll know the difference between those two. You won't know the difference between 17 and 18 thousandths. If it's that tight, it's probably too tight. But then hook up the dial indicator, and then you can figure out what's going on. I'm building a turbo 5.7 Hemi with ported Eagle heads. That's good. That's going to be a lot because those heads flow a lot already. Would stroking it to 392 be worth the gains? I don't know what you're doing. If you're turboing it, I normally don't recommend doing a stroker motor, because the boost just makes up for anything that you would gain in stroke. The only time having more motor is beneficial is if you have a really big turbo and you're trying to drive that turbo. If you have 1,000 horsepower turbo, the 5.7 is going to make 1,000 horsepower. The 392 is going to make 1,000 horsepower. So there's no benefit really for doing the 392. Yeah, you can do the clay approach too. I like doing it with a checker spring just because I can visually see what's going on. But you can do it with clay and guide. But then the thing I don't like about that is then you have to cut the clay and section it and then measure the clay, and those are all like secondary measurements to me. I like actually seeing where it is while it's going. And if you use a light enough checker spring, and even if you're using a hydraulic lifter, the light checker spring won't allow the hydraulic plunger to depress. And so as long as you get the lash right, and there shouldn't be any, there should be zero, which you can adjust. And sometimes we do that with an adjustable push rod. We make sure that there's zero lash on it, and that you're not depressing the spring, and that you're not depressing the lifter. And then we rotate it around. And then when you rotate it around, I recheck it and make sure that there's still no lash in the system. Because if there is lash in the system, then you've just negated your piston to valve clearance check. And then when you do that, like I said, that's the way that I like to do it. There are other ways. I'm a fan of de-stroking motors. I believe the lower piston speed increases engine life. What head should I put on my 68 327 small block? You can't go wrong with an AFR 195, or the Trick Flow has lots of good stuff too, and Dart, and there's lots of good heads for a small block Chevy. That's a great thing. Would a supercharged small block Chevy make more horsepower with an 18-degree head versus a 23-degree head? If the 18-degree head benefits the NA power output, then the motor will make more power at any given boost level with a supercharger. If you're able to max the supercharger out with a good set of flowing 23-degree heads and you put 18-degree heads on it, it's not going to do very much. If you're considering piston speed in these normal kind of street engines, you're barking up the wrong tree. That's like thinking about rod ratio. In these kinds of motors, that's not relevant. The displacement and the compression, those are big things. The rod ratio, that's a little thing. The piston speed, that's a little thing. The piston speed would be more, I'd be more concerned about piston speed and then what I do with the cam timing than I would be about piston speed as it being an absolute thing that's going to limit power or hurt the motor or something. Can destroking make power? No. If you have two motors and one of them is a 4.8 and one of them is a 5.3, the 5.3 is going to make more power. It's going to make more power everywhere. If you have a 6-liter and you put instead of the stock stroke crank, you put a 4.8 crank in it, which is fairly common. Guys like doing that. You aren't going to make you're going to make more power. You're going to make less power, but it's going to be cool because it's a big bore short stroke motor, and guys like that. Yeah, if you do, like Scott brought up a good point about the nitrous motors running massive strokes. If you look at a mountain motor and look at the stroke on a 7, 8, 900 cubic inch motor, it's just ridiculous. I remember talking to Kazi about when I was doing the Engine Masters deal, and he said, yeah, for a long time we were calculating piston speeds on these mountain motors, and he said, and after a while we just stopped doing it. He said, 4,000 feet per second, that's too much. Well, no, really the number is 4,500. No, 5,000 really is the number. I don't know. Should we go to 5,500? And he said, and just after a while, it just kept making power as we would run more engine speed with these things. And he said that we just stopped doing it. We just stopped worrying about it. Calvin did 1,000 horsepower D-stroke engine. I know, but his motor would have been more responsive and made more power if he would have kept the stroke in it. It does not. That's not an example of de-stroking making more power. That's just an example of a motor making power. It doesn't matter what displacement is. And I love Calvin. I love the stuff that they're doing over there. It's just that a lot of guys think that if you de-stroke it, if I put the 4.8 crank in there, it's going to rev like crazy. No, the valve train is what determines the RPM potential of the motor. It's not the stroke length. Not until we get way, way out there, but not in the range that we're not in the 8,000 RPM or sub 8,000 RPM range that we're talking about. De-stroking for long in engine life, that's not accurate either. If you take a look at how long a 5.3 lasts versus a 4.8, one of them has a lot less stroke than the other one. Those two engines last the same time. There's not one that lasts more than the other because it has a shorter stroke. Again, if you look at the range of the motors that we're talking about as an absolute thing, you might be able to convince me that a shorter stroke motor if we ran it at wide open throttle for whatever the length of time is that the motor would last, if you told me that, yeah, the shorter stroke motor lasts longer at that kind of test, I'd like to see that data. I don't know that that's going to be true, but if that was true, I would like to see that data. But I can tell you that a 4.8 doesn't last any more miles than a 5.3 does if you take care of both of those motors. One of them has a shorter stroke, but other things affect that way more than the stroke length does, and way more than the piston speed does. The amount of times that you change your oil over the life of the motor, how many heat cycles you put it through, how hot you get the motor, all of those things play way more of a part than does the stroke length or rod ratio or that kind of stuff. Are AFR ASCAS heads good enough for a street 383? Yes, they are. Look at the flow rates of them and look what they'll support. Tall Garage, thank you very much. Sure, you get these questions a lot. I picked up a GM Gen 5 4.3. Was wondering what budget turbos you have for a twin setup around. I wouldn't do twins on that, not for 500 wheel horsepower. On a 4.3, you should pick a single no, not S475. That would be a big turbo. A GT3582 is what you should pick for that. That would be really good for that displacement of that power level. Whatever happened to the Jegs Kazi small block fork heads? I've tested those one time and they worked really well. It's just that they didn't work really any better than when I tested them against a lot of other heads when I did the big Ford cylinder head deal, and they make as much power as the Twisted Wedge R head did. And I was kind of surprised given how much they flowed, because the flow rates were actually a little better on that Kazi head, but they didn't make the power that the Twisted Wedge R head did. And I would disagree with the statement about less piston speed being less ring wear. I don't think that that's accurate either. Mike, all things being equal, how much horsepower does a 347 do over a 306? Well, if you take a look at some math here, let's say you have a 400 horsepower 306, so 400 divided by 306, that's 1.307 horsepower per cubic inch. So if we multiply that by 347, we get 453.5 horsepower. To give you an idea. So it's about 50 more horsepower if you maintain the same specific output. That's harder to do with the same components, but that gives you an idea. I know it's a little off topic, but is it worth porting 317C heads? Are you talking about a 317 LS head? But then the answer would be yes. I've run ported versions of those heads. They're not my favorite head, but they worked good. Oh, but Rich, what if I want twins? You can put, we all want twins, right? You can put much smaller turbos that would be twins for that power level. I just worry that on that displacement and that naturally aspirated power output, you're going to want them to be responsive. So the turbos are going to have to be pretty small. And I don't know how, if there are inexpensive small versions that would get you what you want, because you have to go smaller than a 3076. Maybe twin like GT20, like 28s maybe would be okay. Have you tested AFR Mongoose LS3 heads? Yes, I have, and they work well, but you have to have enough motor to utilize what the head is able to do. Let's see. Somebody had a B18. I need to talk about the Honda question here. Richard, I've seen B18Bs and B20Bs bend rods and split sleeves a lot more often than B16 and B18s. My understanding was it's because of rod ratio. Is that wrong? Yes, that's wrong. It's not. It has nothing to do with rod ratio. If you saw somebody damage a rod and split a sleeve, it's because the tune was wrong or something else was catastrophically wrong. Have you ever used any Speedmaster heads with decent success? I have. I've used Speedmaster heads a few different times. The one time that they did really well was they sent me a set of LS heads that I tested in the big LS head test, the Cathedral Port head. Most of the other times their heads were subpar unless somebody ported them, then they worked out pretty well. Richard, what do you think about the Pro Max heads? I've run all of the Pro Max head stuff that I've tested have worked really well. Mike, 347 will want cam, heads, fuel. Otherwise, it won't be that much different. A 347 will always be a lot different than a 302. No matter what you do, I've even run them with a stock set of heads, a stock 5.0 camshaft, and the stock like HO intake manifold. And a 347 always makes a lot more torque down low. If you limit it with those other things at the top, the gains that you have at the PR might not be as good. It will be if you give it enough head and camshaft, but down low, it's going to have, it's going to have whatever the specific torque output is. So if it's 47 cubic inches bigger, it's going to have the torque that 47 cubic inches actually add. Mike, that's not correct. An engine with higher piston speed has to wear more. That's 100% not accurate. Like I said, if you measure the wear rate of a 4.8 versus the 5.3, which has different piston speeds, those engines basically last the same amount of time. And what changes the length of time that those motors last has nothing to do with piston speed. It has way more to do with other things that's not related to piston speed. I know we all want that to be the thing. We all want rod ratio to be a big thing. We all want flipping the pistons to be a big thing. But the reality is there are lots more things that we should look at on our list that are way more important and have way more effect on what's actually going on than the little things that we also like to discuss. I just want to say thank you for your great information. Working on my 6-liter with 317 heads, upgrading springs, rockers, head, BTR Norris cam, and S475. That will easily do 1,000. Uh, 550 to 600 horsepower from a 350 cubic inch small block. That would be a lot. It's not insurmountable, but it's just a lot, and it's not any kind of street motor. Is there a difference between an engine assembler and an engine builder? Yeah, there's a big difference. Five 4.3 valve, 330 cubic inch is a stroked 4.6 3-valve 281. Yeah, the 5.4s have a lot. They have a lot of stroke in them. You need to calculate the piston speed of those because those have a really big stroke in them. The 5.4 stuff does. So let's see what's going on with our let's see what's going on with our boat. We have 212 boats. It was 28 minutes ago. We have 244 people here, so that's actually pretty good. With all the boost options available, is an NA stroker buildup still a viable option? And actually, most people are saying yes. So we have 72% yes and 28% no, despite the fact that we all know that obviously I talk about it a lot, and most of the guys here do too. Most of the people here, I think, are kind of pro turbo or forced induction. I'm certain, but I think that's great to know that the people here still want to see like NA power, because really, honestly. If we have a good NA motor and then we add boost to it, it's an even better boosted motor. Would you take a 383 LT1 long block to rebuild? I like free motors all the time. Speaking of piston speed, have a look at a D17 Honda engine. Why would a D17 have lots of piston speed? I'm finally in the majority here. It doesn't matter where you are. Late to the conversation, is an LS3 with an LS7 crank on a carb methanol a viable bracket engine as far as longevity, 7,000 RPM? Yeah, an LS7 crank is going to be weird on the length and stuff. And there are better options than trying to put that factory crank in an LS3. There are lots of 4-inch stroke cranks that you can put in an LS3. That would make it a 416 or something. That's pretty common for that aluminum block. And you can certainly run those at 7,000 RPM. Bob wants a recount. If you bore a block too much, can it have overheating issues? I have been told that, and I'm not sure I totally understand why that's the case. But I know that if you bored small blocks too much, people have told me that you do have overheating issues. Maybe there's not enough material to dissipate the heat or something. If you're not doing your own machine work, you'll never be able to compete with someone that is just buying parts and assembling an engine. Faster piston speed would wear faster, seems like to me. The Russians did everything. Well, certainly if you're watching the Olympics in figure skating, right? Speaking of idle speed, have you ever watched Attack on a Pro Stock? What is a Pro Stock motor idle at, Dan? You need an episode on sucking the pan dry with a high volume oil pump. I think actually what I've been wanting to do on the oiling thing is I want to build a clear pan. So the clear pan idea is cool because you could see what's going on and you could see the maelstrom of like activity that's going on there, which is just ridiculous. And then you could see also what happens when we make a kick out for the pan, train, all that stuff. But it would be also awesome to have, although I don't know how we would do it with. Well, if we had, if we just didn't fill the pan up enough, let's say we put 5 quarts in it, because this thing would have to be fairly deep to be able to work and be able to see it. But if we only put 5 quarts in it and put a high volume pump in it, we could see how quickly that level, like, got sucked down. Because basically the oiling that you have available for the pickup for your oiling system is a function of the engine speed and the drain back of your motor. So if you don't have good drain back, and obviously if it hits all the slinging stuff and that doesn't get down to the pan, and then you have less oil for it to pick up, you can run into a situation where we have before, and especially if you have a high volume oil pump where you're pumping more per revolution. If you have that happen and you don't have the capacity, you'll run out of oil. And it'd be cool to show with actually see it, clear pan. If you have a campground for an LS, what company would you use? Well, it sounds like you already know what specs you want for your camshaft, so lots of people can do that for you. The thinner the cylinder wall, the more heat gets transferred into the coolant instead of out of the exhaust. Caleb, Richard, can you please put me on the top of your list for winning contestants of your next small block Ford engine giveaway? It would be great to drive my fastback Mustang once again at the drag strip. So you think that I've given away motors before? I don't know when that has ever happened, but yeah, we'll put you on the top of the list of the next motor giveaway that we do. Where does the oil hang out if it can't get back to the pan? It hangs out a lot in the valley. Sometimes it hangs out in the valve covers is a very common place. It fills up basically a lot of times it fills up in the valleys or in the under the valve covers. Do Pro pistons make a lot of piston slap noise on a 331 stroker? I don't know if that design or that manufacturer does. That would really be more a function of piston to wall clearance. Engine Masters did an oil test where lowering the oil added 15 to 20 horsepower. That's not uncommon for us to do on big blocks. If you want the oil level to be correct. So if it's too much, you get a bunch of windage and that reduces power. Obviously, if it's too little, then you can run into oil starvation. That's not good. You want the right amount. If it's overfill, which is not uncommon with the way that they rate like these pans. Oh, this is a 10-quart pan. Yeah, that's great. But if you run 10 quarts in it, it just doesn't work. It loses a bunch of power and you've overfilled it. So if having the right amount of oil is really critical. A GT45 is really too small turbo to twin charge an M90. I would disagree with that. We did it on the 3800 and it worked fine. Because an M90 is not a very powerful blower. And a GT45, an M90 is like a 400 or 500 horsepower blower. And GT45 is like a 700 or 800 horsepower turbo. So it would be a lot more, right? Richard, what are your thoughts on venting the wastegate to exhaust or the atmosphere? That's really for me is a noise thing. We always vent to atmosphere when we're running stuff on the engine dyno. You can vent it to the exhaust, and like in a car, it'll definitely make a lot more noise if you vent it to atmosphere. You'll hear the exhaust, the wastegate all the time. If you vent it to the exhaust, you don't hear that. And then the other consideration that some people talk about is the fact that if you're venting it to the exhaust, you're adding more exhaust. And so are you hurting exhaust flow because the exhaust big enough for that? Normally it is, but Russell, I have a 351. How hard does it turn it into a 408 stroker? You just add the right crank and pistons and rods, and you're done. You probably have to notch the block a little bit too at the bottom. Oil hangs out around the crankshaft like a big rope. It is amazing that it spins like it attaches itself onto the crank and spins around. It's kind of cool. Do you have a size wastegate? We run two 45 millimeters, but you can run on the engine dyno. We can't get away with the same thing you can out on the street. On the street, you can get away with something a lot small or not having two of those. What size for the wastegate on a GT45 M90 combo? The M90 having the blower there is not really going to do anything. It's still a function of running the turbo. And on the turbo, when we did it, we were only running 7 pounds of boost on the turbo. So we only had one GT45 on there. Or I take that back. We only had one 45 millimeter wastegate on there. Is it something I can be doing? Is it something I can do at home, or should I be notching the block to be done at a machine shop? Normally, it's done at the machine shop. You can do that with a grinder, but I like to do that. I would do that on mock-up, and then I like to have the finished machining done after we do that. Richard, when you rate turbo horsepower, is that at a given boost level? No, it's just the maximum flow rate of the turbo. stock LS3 block has a 5.6-inch long sleeve. The dart and mids are only 200 longer. How did you grind for a stroker clearance? We just ground where it was necessary. So we mocked it up and then found out where it was hitting and marked it and then ground it. People always forget that in a twin charge setup, you're not going to run anywhere near the capacity of the turbo. You need a way larger turbo to properly twin charge. To do what? Are you trying to optimize that? Are you trying to maximize it? Are you trying to get absolutely as much power as you can? The GT45 is still flowing the amount of air that it's flowing to produce 450 horsepower. When we made 450 horsepower from that twin charge deal, the amount of air processing that turbo was processing was 450 horsepower worth of air. So that turbo will support a lot more than that. So even if it's not ideal, and I don't know what your definition of ideal is, that turbo will still make a lot more power than that 450 horsepower. It will still make near 700 or probably more than that, even in twin charge configuration. Have you ever done any testing on a 5.7 Toyota block? I have not. I would like to, though. So people are still on the piston speed thing. Whenever we talk about that, or rod ratio or all that stuff, people get all fired up. I'm getting a free 3 LT1 that is seized. Oh, that's not a good one then. Yeah, the cookie rumor, I think, is just more of a rumor. Although she makes really good snickerdoodles, though. Oh, it's a Girl Scout cookie time of year. Nice. I didn't realize that. Is it that time already? Are the Grand National and Cyclone Typhoon engines different? Yeah, one of them is a 3.8 liter, and one of them, and the Cyclone Typhoons, the Grand National's a 3.8, and the Cyclones and Typhoons are 4.3 liters. Completely different engine families and different engine designs. Would the truck Norris cam work well in a stock L98 Aussie spec with boost? Yes, because it doesn't care about what the engine is. An L98, I think, is a 6-liter, right? It's not a 6.2. I think it's a 6-liter. And so the truck Norris cam is, depending on what you want to do with it, it might be a little on the small side for a 6-liter, but it will definitely work. And then if you add boost to it, you can easily make 1,000 horsepower. That's what I'm saying, if you're trying to do that. What do you think about boosted DI stuff with AFRs in the mid 12s? Is this on a Gen 5 motor? I think there's only 1 or 2 cookies in the box, and they're up to $5 a box. The biggest problem with twin charge is keeping the IATs cool. I would definitely agree with that, especially with an M90 supercharger, which is why we just had the factory blower pulley on there. We had a 3.8 liter. And if I had a 4-inch or a 4.2 inch, I would have run that, but we didn't have anything bigger than that, which is why we ran that. And then I was, and I had an interesting conversation. This will be the last thing for tonight because I got to get going. I had an interesting conversation with somebody asking me about how to run less boost on that twin charged 3800. So we had the M90 supercharger with the factory 3.8 liter blower pulley spinning that. And then we had a single turbo on there blowing into, with an intercooler, obviously, blowing into the blower. Now it would be ideal to have another intercooler under the blower or run water methanol and all for charge temperature. That would be better. But his question is, how do I not run? Because we were only running 7 pounds with the turbo, and we had the biggest blower pulley, the factory blower pulley on the blower, and it was still making like 21 or 22 pounds. So his question was, how do I make less boost than that? And I said, well, one of the things that we were doing was we were regulating boost pressure for the wastegate between the blower and the turbo. So in the discharge tube of the turbo after the intercooler. So the turbo would keep spinning and keep providing enough airflow to ensure that we had 7 pounds boost there before the wastegate would open. So we had 7 pounds blowing into the blower, and that does a couple things. One, it makes the blower a lot more efficient. So the blower before the turbo was having to draw air in. So it's not very efficient at doing that. So if you have pressurized air feeding the blower, all of a sudden the blower goes, hey, I'm like really happy and I'm being super efficient and I'm making a lot more power because I'm drawing in a lot more air. Well, air is being forced in. So I'm processing a lot more air and forcing a lot more air on the other side, and I'm making the power. So you have the 8 pounds normally that you get from the blower and the 7 pounds that you get from the turbo. But the other thing that's happening is you're making the blower a lot more efficient. So it's using up a lot more of that airflow. So you might be thinking, yeah, but Richard, but then the boost is going to go down between the turbo and the blower. No, that's not the way that the turbo works. The turbo says, yeah, it's getting a lot more airflow into the blower and making the blower more efficient, but I'm still regulating at 7 pounds. So I don't care about that extra airflow. I'm just going to spin faster to make sure that no matter how efficient I'm making that blower, there's still going to be 7 pounds there. So it spun itself up artificially, basically because we're regulating it based on boost and not airflow like we could do, I guess. And so it's making sure that there's 7 pounds there no matter what's happening with the artificial increase in airflow going into the blower. So that's why we're getting 21 pounds, despite the fact that we should only have 15. But the thing is that there are a couple of ways to bring the boost down. So this guy wanted to bring the boost down. One, obviously, you put a camshaft in it. You can port the heads. You can do all that stuff and bring the boost down that way. But the other way to do it would be to regulate the boost, not in between the turbo and the blower, but regulate it at the blower. So you have to regulate it at some realistic amount. So let's say you regulate it at 10 pounds or 12 pounds. So that would only mean that the turbo would have about 3 or 4 pounds or 1 or 2 pounds blowing into the blower. The thing is, for that to work, you have to have a wastegate spring in the wastegate that would open up at that rate. So you have to have a really, really soft spring. And I think that at least the springs that I've seen, I think the lightest ones they have are maybe 3 or 4 pounds. So whatever the smallest spring that you could put in the turbo and have it regulated based on the boost after the blower, then the turbo would open up sooner effectively based on the boost, based on that boost pressure. And so there would be much less boost between the turbo and the blower, and then much less total boost after the blower, and then it would all work out, right? That's my theory, and I'm sticking with it. So let's have with our poll. With all the boost options available, is an NA stroker buildup still a viable option? We're still way to the yes side, so we're at 74% yes and 26% no. So all the turbo guys haven't really taken over, and so we'll quit that. See what guys are doing. I got to get going. Yep. Oh, 73-26. Okay, total of 267 votes. That's nice. Let's see. Okay, there's lots of questions. I could stay here all night and do all that stuff. Thank you guys all for showing up. Hopefully we had a good poll. I thought that was interesting that many guys are still like all motor guys, which I think that they should be. There's lots of good all motor stuff. There's lots of good nitro stuff and turbo stuff and blower stuff, and all of it's good stuff. That's why we like all these different kinds of motors. Thank you guys all for showing up. The next video that I put up will be on the 408, 468, and 495 stroker combinations. I will see you guys all tomorrow.